Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of In Focus. Today we have with us Lauren Taylor, who's a UX researcher from Hedgehog Lab. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
No problem at all. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you very much. I suppose let's start off the way we always start off this podcast, Lauren. In your opinion, what is the most interesting or exciting thing about working in tech at the moment?
Oh, wow. I think that everything is always changing and updating, and you are never comfortable. I don't know if that sounds like a good thing, that you're not comfortable, but I just mean it's not boring. You
Yeah,
can never just feel like you're stuck in one place. Things are always changing. There's always new things to learn, new challenges. And I kind of like that. Some people might not, but for me, it keeps things interesting, and I
I was
like
going
that.
to say, I bet you're never bored.
No, never.
Good, 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 good. And I suppose before we delve in, because you've got a really interesting background and sort of story as to how you've got to where you've got to today, just start us off with UX researcher, because to a lot of people, working in tech means coding something or something akin to like what you see on the Matrix or something like that. But not all roles are in that way techie roles or what have you. So just explain to us, I suppose, UX and what UX research is.
I totally agree with you there about how, from the outside, if you've never worked in tech before, it seems like everything is either you have to know how to work specialized programs or, black screens with white text on, because I feel like that's what you imagine. And it's what I imagined before I got into tech. So UX, for people who don't know, just stands for user experience. Which is pretty self-explanatory. It talks about the experience a user has when using a product from an app or a website or even a chair. It doesn't have to even be tech. You can have user experience and everything.
Mhm.
UX design is usually what people hear, so that encompasses all. I'm struggling to dissect it here, but design is what you would think it was. So how it looks, how it interacts, how it moves. But
Mhm.
UX goes a little bit deeper because it's about how the user feels when having that experience using that product. Is anything frustrating? Does anything need to be kept simpler? It's about accessibility, making sure that everyone can enjoy the product, enjoy the app, the website.
Mhm.
In the past, a UX designer would kind of encompass everything from beginning to end. From the research background at the very beginning, finding out what it is that they even need to design, who it's for,
Mhm.
but I find that now more places are breaking it down. So you have dedicated UX researchers, which is what I ended up in. So the UX researcher is almost at the very beginning of the process. They are
Mhm.
there finding out what is it that's being built, who is it for, what does it need to do, and then they become the voice of the user for that product. So we essentially represent the people. It's a very
Mhm.
people focused role in a world that's all about technology, which is what drew me to it. I like being the voice for people who aren't being heard or aren't in the room. Uh,
Yeah.
that's what I find so interesting about it. That's what drew me to it in the first place. And it's all about problem solving because you want to make something that everyone can enjoy, everyone can access, so that you can be proud of something and no one's kept away from that experience. And
Yeah.
that's what I like about my role.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The way you've described it there, because I think, like you say, stereotypically, it's behind a screen, maybe not speaking to anyone, that type of thing. But the elements that go into designing a technology product, the same as you say, would be like a chair or something like that. There's so many roles now that people may have the misconception that this is just done by the same set of people from start to end. But yeah, being very people orientated may be something that isn't something you generally would assume if you're not in the world of tech, that
Yeah.
working in tech is, which is great. And and that's what this episode's all about. It's to sort of talk about your journey into it and making roles in technology more accessible for people, because you haven't always been in tech, have you, Lauren?
No, definitely not. Far from it, actually.
Talk to
um,
us about what you were doing before and sort of how you got to where you are now.
So yes, so because I love people, I ended up working with children for 13 years in the care sector, which there isn't much tech involved in that, quite frankly. It is very people focused. I'd always wanted to work in tech because ever since being a teenager, I loved it. But like I said, the perception had was graphic design or coding. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm not a good enough artist to be doing graphic design. And coding just really doesn't feel like something I want to do. And so I ended up just following my other passion, which was working with people, and that was children.
Hmm.
Um, but after 13 years in that sector, um, I just needed change. And I had a lot of friends in the tech world who
Hmm.
talked about what they were doing day to day, and they knew so much about what I used to be passionate about. And I just felt like I was missing out. Um, and I would talk about that in front of them. And they were like, well, there are other roles in tech that aren't what you think. There are things that play to your strengths. You love
Yeah.
problem solving, you handle conflict really well, you lead a team, you like people, you know a lot about equity and diversity because of the role I was in and the people and families I worked with. Like all of
Yeah.
that fits really well into something called UX. And I was like, what on earth is UX? And then I fell into that rabbit hole of Google and looking at what UX was. And the more I read, the more I was like, oh, this is actually something I could do. And at the time, my friends knew that I was quite creative. So they pushed me towards design.
Mm.
And yes, I'm still super interested in design. And in the future, I would like to aspire to become a designer as well.
Hmm.
But when I looked at the research side, I was like, I could do this now. This is something I would love to be interested in, involved in. Um, and so I was like, right, okay, let's do this. And that's
Yeah.
more or less how it happened. Um,
Yeah.
just
No, that's great. That's great. Do you think if you'd known about it sooner, you would have changed careers quicker? Or did something happen that sort of was a bit of a catalyst moment for you that pushed you in this direction?
I think I was always put off making a change. My partner, I've been with them for a very long time,
Hmm.
like 12 years, and they are a web developer.
Hmm.
And so it's not like I wasn't around the tech industry. He had always said there are roles out there. He'd never gone in depth about them, but he'd always said you could definitely work in tech, like you could do it. I know you could. But I
Mm.
was like, oh no, like I'm in my late 20s now at the time, and like no one wants to hire an adult as an intern or as for an apprenticeship. And I don't want to go to university because I need a full-time job and I can't afford to pay for boot camps and things like that. And just everything put me off. And so I pushed it back and back. And I think had I known about UX specifically, I definitely might have made the change a tiny bit sooner, but it wouldn't have been drastically time altering. Um,
Yeah.
but that was because of the perception of what I believed it took to get into tech from the outside, um,
Yeah.
more so than my own ability to do it. You know?
Yeah. And would you say that perception is some of the stuff you touched on there, like you need to go to uni or you need to go to a boot camp, or I'm too old to do some of the more accessible routes like apprenticeships and that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think there's definitely I don't know if you want to call it a stigma, but there's definitely a perception from the outside. I think in all workplaces, but specifically in tech, where if you're a little bit older and you haven't like dedicated your whole life to learning about it from the very beginning,
Mm.
it just seems impossible to get into. Um, you think university, you think degree, you think you need a piece of paper that specifically says you can achieve and do this to prove it.
Hmm.
And because of that as well, the resources out there to find a way in without doing that are very limited.
Mm.
If I hadn't been a part of some of the communities that I'd really researched into, I would have never been able to find how to access those routes that I did to get into what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like and this is all about exposing different people's paths into tech. So what worked for you may work slightly differently for someone else, and other routes. There's nothing wrong with universities. I seem to be saying that on every
Yeah.
podcast at the minute. they're also teaching some great stuff there, but it's not super accessible to everyone, I think
Yeah.
is the key thing. So once you've decided this is what I want to do, what was your process of sort of committing to that path and sort of your journey of doing it? Because certainly I know from a previous chat, it wasn't necessarily the most straightforward or easy thing, was it?
No, and I'm just going to start by saying that I was in a privileged place where I had been working full time, my partner had been working full time, and would manage to put some savings away, so that before I start this, I just want to accept that that can be a privileged position for some. But I also do think that what I did would be accessible if you worked full time. It would just stretch out a bit further. So essentially, I burnt out in my previous career, which is daft. I shouldn't have let it get to that point. And that was the catalyst for change. I was like, no, I'm going to do this. And I really threw myself into it. So the first thing I did was I sat down and looked at, you know, the boot camps and the things out there like that and universities. And I looked at what they were teaching, because obviously you kind of get a little synopsis before you pay for something like that, that tells you I can't remember what you call them, but the subjects that you'll be going through.
Like
And
a
then,
syllabus type thing.
yes, that's exactly the word I'm looking for. Looked at that and then looked around to see if there were cheaper alternatives that were teaching the same things. What I came across was using the Google UX design certificate on Coursera. Coursera it was great because it was, you do it in your own time. There's no specific deadlines. You can extend it or do it as quickly as you want, and you don't pay for the qualification or for the course. You just pay for access. So you pay like £30 a month, which was within my budget. And a lot of people look down their nose at that course or the courses like that were a bit cheaper, but they're just there as really great starting off points. I mean, I knew about UX, I'd researched it, but I didn't know what it was broken down into. And that course gave me really good starting points, like foundation levels for each thing in it. And it just meant I knew where to go or what to be looking for. It gave me a good like journey to follow. And I found that super useful and affordable and accessible. And I've recommended it to almost everyone who wants to career switch or is interested in UX, because it's just a great jumping off point. You know, and as well, I looked for any free experiences I could get. So any design challenges that were out there are companies like tech companies out there who do that. So my first one I did with And Digital, they did a series of design challenges. Through those, I met a community of people who were wanting to career switch into tech. And I connected to people who were really local to me. And it just kind of snowballed from there, because to me, I couldn't have made this switch without community, without networking. Networking's a terrifying word. Throw that away, call it community, and just meeting people. I think you think networking, you think suits, you think formal, you think I have to represent this like really straight side of myself that is really educated, but that's not what it is. It's just a fancy word for like making acquaintances in the same industry as you. One of the women I met, she ran something called Women in Tech Northeast and held her first networking event, and I went to that without a job. I wasn't in the industry, and I think that's another thing that people don't think they can do. They're like, I can't go to networking if I don't work in the industry already, but yes you can, because you're interested in it, and those events are all about making connections. And I actually met some people from Hedgehog Lab there prior to me even applying at all. But it was just great to meet people in the roles that I was interested in. And then they would ask me about my skills, and I would just talk about, I was a bit self-deprecating because you are when you talk about yourself. But I talked about what I did, and they were like, oh my God, yeah, that can definitely fit into UX. And it was a great way of building self-confidence as well. And I was like, well, if these strangers believe in me, and why would they lie? So sure. And they were also willing to like, oh well, I can ask my boss actually if we're hiring interns or apprenticeships, or you know. And I hate that the phrase "it's not what you know, it's who you know" is actually quite true. And so networking's so useful, but again, I will scream that it does not need to be something that is so formal and scary. It can be something like joining a community on Twitter or a hashtag on Instagram, It doesn't have to be LinkedIn, writing a status on LinkedIn or posting something that's
Hmm.
really long and rambly and uses technical terms. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard to put yourself out there in those places and be vulnerable and show that you don't know everything, especially if you're a career switcher and you've come from a
Mm.
background where you knew everything to now you're like the newbie. And if you're also an adult in that space, it's even more
Yeah.
scary. But you kind of have to let that guard down, put yourself out there, and realize you're not the only one out there doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. You can't have been alone at these networking events with, or community events. Let's just start calling them community events, where you were looking to career switch, or others must have been there at the same time as well, and looking to gain the same sorts of insights.
Yeah, and it's a big reason I continue to go to those events now
Mm.
because I want to help other people find those roles and move into those roles. And at every event, there are people who are like, "Oh, I'm an aspiring this or an aspiring that," and you can you're there to help other people as well. And I understand how hard that journey is, and it's
Yeah.
why I continue to go. But I made some really close friends who were all wanting to switch into UX.
Mm.
Um, and it's not like we met up every day. There's none of that pressure. We just like messaged online, but we would share resources and opportunities. They would send design challenges they'd seen online. We'd all do it together. So there was a few of us signed up for one with Code First Girls.
Hmm.
They run free things all the time that are so useful. Um, and it's actually how I found out about a mentoring program. I think I'd mentioned to you before when we chatted, the Kajigo mentoring program. So it's about getting women into tech, and
Hmm.
they have mentors from the tech industry in all different roles, and they match them with mentees to help build that confidence. But more
Yeah.
so than that, it creates community. So there would be a session once a week, and we'd all join in, and they would have industry experts come in and talk about different things in the industry. We'd have recruiters come in and talk about how to build a CV. We'd have design leads come in, devs come in, talk about what they look for, what skills when they're hiring. And it
Hmm.
was a really, really useful way of kind of letting your guard down in a community and learning. And also, when I got my interview, which also is just an informal chat, because I did not realize in tech that informal chats, it's another word for an interview on occasion.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that at the time. Um, but the amount of like support and like constructive things I got from that community, they were like,
Mm.
"Oh, well, when you go in, talk about this or don't ask about that." And yeah, it was really helpful. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. And well, but for everyone listening, we'll post links to everything we're talking
mhm.
about in the description below, so you don't have to try and make a note of everything that's going on. But that's, I think, what strikes me there is, because I think historically and possibly also currently, research shows that men are more likely to be like, take a gamble on something, or oh, I'll just give it a go, see what happens, that type of thing. And women are more likely to sort of pick holes in where they can't do stuff, and maybe if they're not hitting 100% of it, actually be like, not for me, that type of thing. But what strikes me about what you're saying is that you just went for it, and then at every sort of bit, whether it be the mentoring, whether it be the networking, there was verification that you were actually, I'm on the right lines because I want to do this. People are telling me I can do this, and they're offering a load of support. Would you say, sort of opening yourself up to that is like critical to career changing, whether it's into tech or not, really?
I would, and I'm sure introverts do not want to hear that, but it's just so helpful. It's so useful to have people to fall back on. There were people who were having interviews and getting turned down, come to a community, talk about what they think went wrong, got some advice about it, but also people just backing them up and
Mm-hmm.
saying, no, try again. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because yes, you can hear that from family and friends, but they're not as invested in the actual sector that you want to work in, and they don't get it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you've got people on the level who understand you, and everyone's cheering each other on and offering support, it just really helps. And it, like I said before, it opens up doors for opportunities. You
Yeah.
know, not long after I got my role at Hedgehog, Hedgehog Lab.
Mm.
I actually got messages from people that I'd been in the different programs with who also were all getting jobs and were all reaching out to me to be like, oh, we've actually got an opportunity here. You should come. And, you know, it just
Mm.
snowballs. So it seems something so little as saying, hello, how are you? Can we connect on LinkedIn? What about Twitter? Oh, you're doing that Code First Girls thing as well. To then
Mm.
like months down the line, it could be a full-time position.
Yeah.
It it's worth making those tiny little scary steps, because it's like once you've jumped, you're in and it's okay. It's fine. Uh,
Yeah.
and you get the positive validation as well. And it's just nice. And it just feels like people have your back. So it's good.
Yeah. No, well, exactly that, and you know, the more the better, really. So whether that be virtual or in person, I personally always think you get a bit more out of in person, which is even harder to do if you've not done this type of thing before. But after the first time, it's often, you know, a bit easier, isn't it? Because you know
Oh,
what
yeah.
to expect.
That first in-person event was terrifying. I remember walking up the stairs because I was on my own, and I only knew the person who was running the event. So very obviously they were not going to have time to like chaperone me around. And also everyone else knew her. So
Mm.
um and it's terrifying. But what was funny is I went and stood next to someone else who was alone and they looked just as terrified as me. And it was just
Yeah.
about stepping off the ledge first. And the minute I was like, hi, I'm Lauren. I'm not even in tech. I don't know what I'm doing here. And then they were like, oh, well, actually, I do work for a tech company and I do this, but I'm just here to like meet other people. And yet we were both stood against a wall being terrified. And I was like,
Yeah.
you know what, let's do this. So if you're an
Yeah.
introvert, you need to find an extrovert and then they'll drag you along. And that's what community is about.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
in the virtual spaces, it is harder and it's not as personal initially. But then they are the people who you can message at all hours because everyone's always online or on the
Mm.
sites that you're on. So it's positive from a different perspective. And also then you're not tied to a certain time or place. I mean, I've spoken to people who live in like America or Hong Kong, Singapore, like
Mm.
different places around the world, and you can hear about different experiences and skills. I will also say that I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I will say that there is a lot of information about the state of like the tech industry, but it all
Mm.
gets mixed together. And so it's hard to differentiate if they're talking about the UK or America, because I was coming across a lot of American news in my news
Mm.
feeds, like, you'll never get to be a UX designer. It's so hard to get a job over here, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
Actually, it was very different in the UK, and a lot of people want UX designers and UX researchers. And so I
Yeah.
was terrified for no reason until I made that
Yeah.
connection of why I was saying that. Um, don't let the headlines like that put you off, because I think it can be off-putting to even you're like, what's the point in continuing my journey if no one's going to hire me? They're going to hire someone who's got years of experience because, you know, there's loads of people applying, but it's not
Yeah.
worth talking to yourself that way.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's the old saying, isn't it? There's always 100 reasons not to do something, and if you look hard enough, you'll find one. But yeah, if you try to ignore them as much as you can and push on, you can get to places like, you know, like where you are now. But I suppose one question to ask about the journey, which some people may, you know, be wondering or relate to, what was like the pressure like of I've got X amount of, did you set yourself a time limit in terms of I'm going to give it this long, and if it doesn't work, you know, that's sort of how long I'll leave it, and then there might be a backup plan? Or, and what was that sort of like, you know, journey like mentally for you, where you weren't finding a job straight away?
It was really difficult because I left my full-time job because of burnout. I had
Mm.
a few months to kind of just get myself back together. Um, and thankfully, when I realized how much I actually liked UX, it kind of brought that passion out and I could
Mm.
dive into it. I didn't give myself a timeline on when I was going to get a tech job. I was like, if I have to get a different job that isn't as time consuming and that's a little less, it wasn't going back into care because that was just too
Mm-hmm.
much. I
Mm-hmm.
would do it and learn at the same time. I didn't put
Yeah.
pressure that the next job I had to get it had to be in tech. I just knew that's where I was going. That was my destination.
Yeah.
And so I just checked in with myself each month or with my partner, and would talk about where I was at, because it's just so scary to apply for things especially when you're self-taught or you're doing things on your own terms. No one's there to tell you, okay, you're ready to apply for a job now. You're not immersed in the industry. You go to university or a boot camp, you've got people who are kind of putting you in spaces where you can learn more about the industry. You might go to design agencies as a designer and kind of get a taste of what it's like. When you're self-taught, you don't have that. So it's harder to measure, and it's terrifying. And I was at the stage where I was going to start writing my CV. Because obviously my CV was all care. I mean, I was like, how on earth am I going to relate that back? But then instead, so this is what I mean about community, not networking. Community. So I told everyone I was going to start applying soon, and I spoke to someone. It was actually a parent of a child that I used to look after, and I spoke to them, and I said, oh, I'm going to start applying for jobs soon. I've finished my course. I feel like I can't learn any more without doing it professionally, like being in that space. And they said, oh, I know people in that industry. I'll put out the feelers for you on LinkedIn, and I'll connect you with a few people. And so we did that. And I spoke to these people. There was UX researchers and UX designers. And the conversations weren't, can I have a job? It was conversations like, so in your role, what is it really like? What are the real skills that you use day to day? Do I need a piece of paper? Do I need, what do I need on a CV? Do I even need a CV? Is there a way to get in without that? Do I need a portfolio? I mean, that's how I was drawn then more to research, because I spoke to actual researchers, and they told me more about the day-to-day soft skills that you need. And I was like, okay, this is less scary now. And I found that so useful, reaching out and speaking to people like who are in the role that you want. Just ask about their day-to-day and what they want to hear from maybe new team members, or if they are leads of their teams, what they look for when they're hiring people. It just so happens that one of those people I spoke to was the head of design at Hedgehog Lab. And I'd said to him, I'm not looking for a job. I just know you hire UX designers and researchers, and I want to know what you look for. And that conversation, we talked about what I'd been doing, and it kind of, that is what led to my job at Hedgehog Lab. He put me in touch with his head of research. We had a conversation where I literally, again, wasn't looking for a job. I just wanted to know about what he was doing. And he was like, oh, okay, I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks, but maybe I'll get in touch afterwards. And I was like, oh, I'll never hear from any of these people again, because that wasn't my aim anyway. But because I'd made those connections, I'd spoken to these people, they'd seen my face, they'd heard me talk, and it was almost like a cheat code, because I'd got to informally meet these people and make an impression. So my first impression wasn't going to be a CV. That they had me in mind when a role came up. And that's how I got invited in for an informal chat, which I now know is another code word for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, they're like, I think that's another really important part of the journey, isn't it? You could be as out there as you want and, teach yourself everything, but we need more employers in the market like Hedgehog Lab that are willing to look at people from a diverse range of backgrounds. So I suppose let's swing round onto Hedgehog Lab now, if that's okay, in terms of what's it like working there, but also, their approach to hiring people like yourself. And how are they making that work? Because it's not something that all companies are doing.
No, it's not. And that was the hardest thing. Everyone will say this about every career ever, but they're like, here's a junior position, but you need 2 years experience to do it. Here's an internship, but you need to have a degree already. There's not a lot of places out there offering junior roles without having paper to back it up or experience, which puts people off. But I mean, from the very beginning, if you read how Hedgehog Lab frame their job adverts, they don't even mention a piece of paper at all. No qualification, no nothing. It's very much framed around, will you fit into the culture of their business? Sarat, the CEO, is very invested in people, and that it's not just a business that makes products and makes money, it's a team that you can be proud of. I will say that I really think it's going to sound like, you know, I'm talking about where I work and I'm just trying to big it up, but I really mean this. You know, a lot of places talk the talk. Hedgehog Lab really does walk the walk when it comes to culture and people being valuable assets, and they invest in talent. You know, I think they have a really informal interview process. It lets people let their guard down and then get a real feel for a person. And so, I mean, if I talk to like my managers, and I have talked to them about offering me the position they did, it's about seeing potential in people, because you can teach skills, but you can't teach persistence and passion and drive. And more businesses need to look at things that way, because you could hire someone who can design amazing websites, but like if they don't love their job, or they're not invested in it, or they're not supported in a culture that works for them, then they're not going to do their best work. But if you've got a team who you've helped grow from the very beginning, who value what their company has done for them, and they want to work there and feel engaged and like they have a voice, then it's very different. And I think that's the difference at Hedgehog Lab for me. I think you can see it's people driven, and it's more than skills. You know, everyone is actually very talented and I'm blown away when I see the work that people do. But the funny thing is like there's no toxic atmosphere. When they talk about culture, they don't just mean here's a pizza party. You know, it means you have a voice you're listened to. There's a very open communication across all levels of the business. It's just really nice, and there needs to be more of that, especially in the tech industry, especially in those companies that are huge and kind of have the financial ability to offer those positions. It would be really nice, just as a way of, especially of getting adults to change careers as well. And you'll get people who are passionate because they're chasing. You know, they're not people. And again, I'll follow you. There's nothing wrong with university. If you knew what your passion was when you left school and therefore jumped into it in university, like, I'm jealous, to be fair, like, well done. But you can get people who like myself, when I fell into care because I followed my qualifications, and you can get the same people in those industries. So degree doesn't automatically equate to passion. So
no, absolutely. And I think you know, there's 2 points there which I think are really important. You can't just keep, as a company, fishing in the same pond, because salaries are going up and up and up, and people have started to realize actually we don't have an endless amount of money to pay people, and we need to really start to think about you know, diversifying the talent that we bring in and where we bring that talent from. Whether that be, you know, career changes, it could be, you know, the over 50s, and, you know, there's a report that's been said that actually more and more people are retiring, but actually a lot of them want to work and come back to work. And, you know, we've got some tech focused people in that sector as well that are, you know, chasing their dream. And, you know, it's never too late. But I bet the other point I wanted to make was, I bet you benefit at Hedgehog Lab from a really like diverse set of experiences and backgrounds and viewpoints that you may not get in other organizations that look for a lot of the same profile. Because, you know, I'm guessing you could take your experiences of working in the care sector and working a lot with children and stuff like that and apply elements of that to your role, but someone else that's worked somewhere else and now has got into tech is sort of applying that, which overall I think it must be great, correct me if I'm wrong, to learn from, but then, you know, the products and the things you're developing and designing must end up being richer as a result.
Of course, and it's really apparent in, you know, when you work in teams on a project, that those life experiences from previous outside of the box to tech roles, how they inform things like the designs we do and how we do work. From my perspective, I've got that experience of families, and there was a lot of focus on equity and diversity in those spaces. So I have a lot of knowledge of that, and I'm really passionate about it. I work with another researcher who was another career switcher who got into Hedgehog Lab, and she worked for the NHS previously. So when she works on projects that are related to maybe like medical backgrounds, she has that knowledge from outside, that internal knowledge that's really useful. And everyone can bring a little bit of something. And I think that's super valuable at the lab. A lot of people look down on people who work in care, unless you're like a doctor or a nurse, I suppose. But if you look after children, or maybe like you're a nursery worker like I was, people are kind of like, how can those skills translate? I've never once come across that at Hedgehog Lab ever, or in the communities where I was networking with other career switchers. No one was ever like, oh, well, I can't see how that can translate across. Everyone was like, oh, so you must have a lot of patience and a lot of conflict resolution. You must really know about problem solving and thinking outside of the box, because those are all things you get, but they're not things that you can quantify on a piece of paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Hedgehog Lab talk about that, and always have. And like I said about being self-deprecating, when I first joined and I would have check-ins after I did like pieces of work at the beginning, or even I still do it now, where I'm like, I'm not sure I'm doing this right sometimes, or I'll talk down about myself, and they're like, yeah, but what about this that you did? And it's all based in the experiences I had previously in tech,
Yeah, absolutely. And I know exactly how much patience you must have had. I've got a 2.5-year-old and I've only got the one. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there. Okay, great. I think to round up, I'll go through some of the quick fire. You don't have to answer them like straight away or what have you. But some roundup questions that I ask everyone. Firstly, though, I wanted to cover off. If you are in the Northeast, this will go further than the Northeast. But if you're in the Northeast, what are some of the networks that you would recommend people get involved in? If you're looking to break into a career in tech, what were some of the ones that you used?
Honestly, the main one that I was involved with was the Women in Tech Northeast community, mainly because it's very active and people really help you. Not, I know I said in the Northeast, but the Could You Go mentoring program and like Code First Girls, things like that aren't even region based. They're just so useful, and they are the most useful tools for me in seeing where other people were in their journeys, getting a comparison of skills, finding out about opportunities. I mean, without those, I wouldn't be where I am. So they were the most important kind of resources to me. And just on social media, there are groups and communities out there that you might not relate to being like profession. Like, you're on Twitter, you're like, oh, I'm never going to find something to do with jobs in tech on there. Of course you are. There's a whole design community. It's amazing. And LinkedIn doesn't have to be as formal as people think it does. But yeah, those communities, without that,
Brilliant. Good stuff. And we'll get links to those posted up as well. How would you, going from, like a care service-based role previously, going now into a tech job as a UX researcher, how do you define success for yourself day to day or month to month? How do you know you're doing a good job? Because that might not be obvious to people that work outside the industry, because they've done different types of roles or different types of careers.
I think getting feedback is key. I'm in a company that has in my team regular check-ins and an open communication system, so I can check in at any time. And because I'm in a space that's all about development, I'm not afraid to ask about how to do things. Success for me is just, I don't know, like, I feel comfortable, I feel happy in what I've done. I know that's really basic, but if I'm not feeling stressed about everything that I've done, if I look at something and I'm like, I'm proud of that, just taking those little wins, doesn't have to be massive achievements. You know, one day you'll be like, I don't know what that means. Next week you'll use that term yourself. And that's like a little win. You know, you go on your first client project, you have no idea what it is, but you learn so much. So then a month later, the success is the fact that now you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just checking in and looking back and reflecting on it. And that helps. You're like, oh, I didn't used to know what this was, and now I do. So there's a win really quickly there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It does. It does. And it's interesting because you know, everyone has a different answer for that. And it's about letting people know that, you know, as you've said, it's not like always hitting a massive milestone. It's like something you can check in once a day, more than once a day. It's like, are you better than you were the day before in understanding or ability and stuff like that? And I think you know, breaking those things down, again, it's all about accessibility. It just makes it more accessible, more achievable for people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I
Great.
think like in comparison, when someone had asked me what UX research was about at the
Mm,
beginning, I couldn't have told them without umming and ahhing all over the place about what the role was. And if someone asked me to talk about what I do in my role now, I could tell them.
mm,
So even that's like the first networking event I went to, I was like, I want to get into UX research. Someone's like, what is that? And I'm like, how do I describe it? And then I went to a more recent networking event and could tell them straight away what my job role entailed. And
mm,
I left that and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's such a win for me because I could not do that before and I didn't have the
mm.
confidence to talk about it. And now I feel reassured that I actually know what I'm talking about. And that's like a tiny
Yeah.
win. Like that's
Yeah.
not something on paper again or that you
Mm,
can check off. It's just
yeah.
about being present and noticing the difference, the growth.
Yeah, exactly that. And, you know, being in it when it's happening.
Mhm.
Because I think that so often people can't see the wood for the trees when they're really getting something. And sometimes taking that step back is really important. But that brings us on to, I suppose, the final question. And this is a two-parter. What's the best
Okay.
piece of advice you've ever received that might help somebody? And what would, you know, if it's not the same, what advice would you give people that are looking to, you know, break into tech from your experiences?
Okay. What's the best advice I've ever received? Oh my gosh, I really wish I had prepared this. Uh, um, I know it's really cheesy, and I feel like anyone who is listens to this will be like, "Oh, of course," but like just believe in yourself and what you can do. That little voice that says, "I can do this," is often overshadowed by the technicalities of it and the logic side of your brain. And
Mm,
it's all about listening to that little bit of your voice that's like, you can do it. Because I put myself down all the time and I would have people in communities being like, no, believe in what you can do. You've just told me with confidence your skills. Believe it.
mhm,
Like, stop putting yourself down. Um, and it's almost exactly the same as fake it till you make it, which I think is really cliche, but excellent advice because fake it till you make it comes across as like, so you're protected and people around you think you know what you're doing. But it's not that they think, you know, it's like in their heads, they're like, oh, I know they can do that. And the
mm,
more people around you feel that, you feel it yourself, it gets projected back at you. So the more you're saying, oh, yeah, I know what that is, I can do that, it's
mm.
you're faking it to yourself too. And then you believe it and then it becomes truth. Like,
Yeah.
just put your mind to it, you can do it, not a problem. Yeah, absolutely. Don't let the
Yeah.
self-doubt creep in. When it creeps in, just be like, no, hush, I've got this. Um, and it's the same when coming into tech or making a career switch. Um, you know, find something like a soft skill that you really like. If you're not into like development or design, find
Mm,
a soft skill you like. If you really like organizing and being in charge of people and you're really good at management, then like
mm,
project management in tech, you don't necessarily have to know the technology, you'll learn it on the job.
mm.
So you can learn that, but if you are really good at the management side of things, you've got it. Don't
Yeah.
think that I need to have had a piece of paper that says project management on it, because you need to get that job first. So you can't have experience without getting the job in the first place. So
Yeah.
don't be put off. And agree with your statistic about men tend to apply for like 80% of, like, so if they meet like 60% of something on a job resume, they will apply.
Mm.
A woman wants to meet 80.
Mm.
Nah, forget that. Just apply. Just put applications
Yeah.
out there. Like, what they're gonna do, they'll just be like, not read it or say no, but like, you've done it. And sometimes just sending something is an achievement in itself. But yeah, fake it till you
Yeah.
make is the best advice I have for people. Fake that
That's great.
confidence, put it out there, and
That's
it'll become reality.
that's
I
great,
believe.
Lauren. I want to thank you for your time. Some really valuable insights. We'll get links posted up to all of the various networks and everything we've spoke about. I do know Hedgehog Lab personally. I know they're a fantastic organization, and I believe, to be honest, I believe they're always recruiting. So anyone that is looking for a career switch, based on this conversation, you should probably go and get in touch with them. But make your own minds up. And yeah, just wanted to really thank you for your time, Lauren, because I know how busy the days get. And thank you very much for taking part.
No problem. I love talking about all of this, and if it can inspire one person to just do it, then mint. Awesome.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
1